Why does one of North America's most infamous maritime disasters remain a strictly forbidden zone for explorers, where even a single sonar ping can trigger $1 million fine beneath the freezing, churning surface of Lake Superior lies the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, a 700-foot titan that vanished from radar in seconds, taking 29 souls into an icy abyss without a single distress call, while official reports insist on a sudden, freak tragedy. The eerie silence surrounding the wreck suggests something far more calculated. Why are the authorities so desperate to keep the world away from this grave? Is it truly to honor the fallen? Or are they shielding a systemic failure that the shipping industry has fought for decades to bury? Don't look away, because the journey to the final minutes of this voyage is where everything changes. We will piece together the fragments of a story that has defied explanation, leading you to a sobering realization that will stay with you long after the screen goes dark. The year 1958 saw the United States standing before a new threshold, marking a pivotal moment in an era, a time when, after the quiet lull of post-war recession, America had truly awakened. Across the nation, from massive industrial construction sites to bustling design offices, there was a palpable, surging spirit of conquest and a bold, unprecedented ambition to rise. The St. Lawrence Seaway, an engineering marvel of epic proportions, was reaching its final stages of completion, officially throwing open the gates for the Great Lakes to reach the oceans and connect with global trade. Shortly thereafter, the towering presence of the legendary Mackinac Bridge, connecting the two peninsulas of Michigan, stood as the ultimate declaration of a nation determined to shatter every geographical limitation, using the sheer power of engineering to forge a prosperous future. It was within this fevered atmosphere of ambition that the SS Edmund Fitzgerald was born, launched on June 7, 1958, by the Great Lakes Engineering Works in River Rouge, Michigan. The ship was conceived to embody this new industrial faith, while the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers began planning for the massive Pollock, specifically designed to accommodate the next generation of 1,000-footers. The Fitzgerald arrived as an immediate and definitive answer to the era's demand for size, speed, and cargo capacity. Christened the Queen of the Lakes, she was a vessel of staggering proportions, measuring 729 feet in length and displacing 13,632 gross tons, standing as the largest ship to ever navigate these waters at the time. To put her scale into perspective, if stood upright, she would have towered over a 60-story skyscraper, a colossal monument in steel to human ingenuity, meticulously engineered to outperform any freighter that had dared to ply these treacherous channels before her. The Fitzgerald was built to be the ultimate conduit for taconite iron ore, the resource fueling the nation's insatiable steel mills. In the post-war era of the 1950s and 1960s, the Fitzgerald served as the vital, beating lifeblood of the American steel industry, built for a singular, relentless purpose. Her primary mission was to haul thousands of tons of taconite iron ore pellets from the iron-rich, harsh mines of Duluth, Minnesota, down through the sprawling shipping channels to the hungry steel mills of Detroit, Michigan, and Cleveland, Ohio. During this period, the American demand for steel was effectively insatiable. It was the material backbone of everything from the explosion of the American automotive industry to the rapid, expansive growth of national infrastructure that defined the era. The Fitzgerald was a massive, mobile, and highly efficient conveyor belt, a critical, non-negotiable component of a supply chain that dictated the very economic heartbeat of the nation. Her crew and her owners understood that the prosperity of the American manufacturing machine relied entirely on her ability to deliver on time, a crushing responsibility that fostered a corporate culture where performance and speed were prioritized above all else, and the Fitzgerald was the jewel in the crown of that fleet. However, this unparalleled industrial success bred a pervasive and ultimately dangerous culture of institutional overconfidence that would eventually manifest as a fatal flaw. The maritime industry, throughout the mid-20th century, operated under a rigid, almost dogmatic bigger is better philosophy, a mindset driven by the necessity for greater cargo capacity and faster turnaround times in an era of fierce economic competition. Engineers, corporate executives, and vessel operators alike developed a deep-seated, almost religious reliance on their design specifications, convinced that their technical mastery had finally conquered the notoriously temperamental and volatile waters of Lake Superior. Looking back at the historical trajectory of the shipping industry, we are compelled to ask, did this early, consistent success create a fatal blind spot? By constantly pushing the outer limits of vessel size, speed, and cargo capacity, the industry may have inadvertently ignored the fundamental, untamable unpredictability of the Great Lakes. They placed an unwavering, near-total trust in the steel plating, the precision of the rivets, and the cold, unyielding logic of their mathematical models, effectively forgetting that Lake Superior, the coldest, deepest, and largest of the Great Lakes, creates its own distinct, brutal weather systems. These systems are capable of generating rogue waves and cyclonic storms with a ferocity that can snap a vessel's spine like a dry Britteltwich, regardless of her tonnage. In hindsight, the true arrogance of that era was not found in the engineering itself, but in the prevailing, unquestioned belief that these massive iron vessels were essentially invincible against the whims of the lake. The Fitzgerald was undeniably the pinnacle of her time, yet she was also a direct, tragic product of a commercial philosophy that prioritized speed and maximum cargo volume over the increasingly complex and lethal realities of modern maritime safety. The morning of the 9th of November, 1975. As the SS Edmund Fitzgerald departed Superior, Wisconsin, she carried a heavy, formidable burden, 2611, 6 tons of taconite iron ore pellets. This massive, iron-dense cargo sat low in the water, transforming the vessel into an incredibly powerful force of commerce, yet simultaneously rendering her potentially vulnerable to the sea's rapidly shifting temperament. At the helm stood Captain Ernest McSorley, a master mariner of legendary status with decades of experience traversing the Great Lakes. His professional reputation was as ironclad and dependable as the vessel he commanded. However, even a captain of McSorley's immense experience could not have fully anticipated the atmospheric shift that was beginning to unfold across the Midwest. The weather maps of that morning were starting to scream a meteorological warning that few in the industry truly appreciated at the time. A powerful low-pressure system was deepening with frightening exponential speed. Meteorologists would later characterize this event as a true weather bomb, a meteorological anomaly born from the violent, high-energy collision between a frigid, descending mass of Arctic air and a surging, moisture-laden wall of intense heat pushing northward from the Gulf of Mexico. This extreme pressure gradient generated hurricane-force winds of over 90 miles per hour, whipping Lake Superior into a frenzy of destruction that completely defied the predictive capabilities of the maritime safety standards prevalent in the 1970s. Lake Superior, by virtue of its massive, deep-water basin, essentially functions as a natural, lethal funnel for these types of storms. As the system tracked inexorably across the lake throughout November 10, the wind's immense, punishing force began to churn the water into chaotic, towering, steep-faced waves. Unlike the long, rhythmic, predictable swells one might encounter on the open ocean, the waves of Lake Superior are frequently tripped by the sudden, dramatic shifts in the lake's bottom topography, particularly in the specific areas the Fitzgerald was navigating toward Whitefish Point. These treacherous, shallow shoals forced the water to stack vertically, leading to the formation of the notorious and lethal Three Sisters, a phenomenon where three massive, sequential waves crash in rapid, punishing succession, overwhelming the deck and potentially swamping even the largest of freighters before they have the necessary time to recover their buoyancy. Throughout that grueling day of November 10, the Fitzgerald fought to hold her course, maintaining a position in relative proximity to the Arthur M. Anderson, a fellow freighter captained by Bernie Cooper. The radio communications between McSorley and Cooper throughout that harrowing afternoon provide the most chilling, intimate window we have into the final, desperate hours of the Fitzgerald. By 3:30 p.m., the tone of these transmissions had shifted from routine transit updates to grave concern. McSorley reported, with a professional detachment that is both profoundly admirable and deeply unsettling, that the ship was taking on water and had developed a distinct concerning list. He noted, with an almost alarming, stoic calm, that some of the topside railings had been torn away by the violence of the seas, and that two of the ship's massive vents had been lost or rendered non-functional. When Captain Cooper pressed him for more detail regarding the ship's status, McSorley's voice remained unnervingly steady. There was no trace of panic, no frantic, desperate request for immediate assistance. Only the measured report of a captain who was clearly fighting a losing battle against the elemental forces, but remained tethered to the quiet dignity of his command. This radio dialogue continued to haunt investigators and historians for decades, particularly because of the sheer, haunting brevity of McSorley's updates. At 7:10 p.m., the Anderson contacted the Fitzgerald one final time to check on her progress. Captain Cooper asked a direct, pressing question. "Fitzgerald, how are you making out with your problems?" McSorley's response, "We are holding our own," would become the final words ever received from the bridge of that ship. Just 10 minutes later, at 7:20 p.m., the Edmund Fitzgerald simply ceased to exist on the radar screen of the Arthur M. Anderson. The perspective of the Anderson's crew serves as our only lens into these final, desperate moments. For those men standing on the bridge of the Anderson, the disappearance of the Fitzgerald was not accompanied by a pyrotechnic explosion or a visual flare of distress. It was an abrupt, soul-crushing erasure. One moment, a massive, comforting, solid blip was visible on the radar scope, indicating that their companion was still navigating the dark. The next moment, there was nothing but the howling, empty void of the storm. The realization that 29 men had been claimed by the lake was a slow, agonizing descent into disbelief and shock. The Anderson was herself battling 35-foot seas just to maintain her heading, and the realization that a ship as large, powerful, And modern as the Fitzgerald had been wiped off the face of the earth, sent a message of existential dread through every sailor across the Great Lakes. If she could be taken by the water, then safety was nothing more than an illusion. This leads us to the most perplexing, debated, and psychologically tormenting mystery of the entire investigation: the absolute haunting absence of an SOS signal. Why did a man of McSorley's profound experience never reach for the radio to signal a mayday? During those final, dying hours, the Fitzgerald had lost her radar, and her list was perceptibly increasing. Yet McSorley never broadcast a formal distress signal. This silence remains the primary catalyst for the intense debate that has defined this tragedy for 50 years. Some experts argue that the ship was hit by a rogue wave that caught her broadside, causing an instantaneous, catastrophic structural failure that snapped the hull in two before the crew could even grasp the gravity of their situation. Others posit that the Fitzgerald was already so severely damaged and listing so heavily that the bridge crew was entirely consumed by the physical, frantic, and ultimately impossible act of trying to keep the vessel from capsizing, rendering any communication attempts entirely secondary to survival. The eerie, unflappable calmness in McSorley's final words suggests a captain who was either holding onto a sliver of hope that he could still hold his own, or a man who was confronted by an event so sudden, so violent, and so overwhelming that it defied the standard protocols of human reaction. As we peel back these layers, we are forced to confront a deeply disturbing central possibility: that the Edmund Fitzgerald did not sink by slow, visible degrees, but was instead erased from the surface of the earth by a force so sudden, so absolute, and so crushing that it rendered the very technology intended to save her entirely useless. We are left not with a neat, definitive answer, but with an echo, a question that resonates across the lake's deepest, darkest channels. What happens when a titan of industry meets an irresistible, elemental force? Why did the Queen of the Lakes go down without a single cry for help, leaving only silence in her wake? She remains a testament to the fact that when industrial hubris meets the raw, untamable power of the water, the result is a mystery that even the most advanced science has yet to fully reconcile, leaving the families and the world forever wondering about the true final moments of the 29 men who sailed into the darkness and never returned. The profound silence of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald on the cold, unforgiving floor of Lake Superior did not remain unchallenged for long, as the initial shock of her sudden disappearance rippled through the global maritime community. The wreck site, resting in eternal darkness at a depth of 530 feet, slowly transformed from a site of singular mourning into the focal point of a series of increasingly sophisticated and often intensely contentious underwater expeditions. In the immediate aftermath of the tragedy, the U.S. Navy conducted an initial survey utilizing side-scan sonar, an early technological effort to map the wreckage and attempt to pinpoint the elusive cause of the disaster. By 1980, the legendary oceanographer Jacques Cousteau descended to the site, providing the world with its first visceral, chilling look at the broken iron giant that had once been the pride of the lakes. Yet, as our underwater technology evolved from rudimentary sonar to high-definition, maneuverable remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, the controversy surrounding her final moments did not clarify. Instead, it deepened, turning into a labyrinth of conflicting data. Each new mission seemed to unearth as many questions as it did answers, effectively transforming the Fitzgerald from a mere maritime casualty into an enduring, multi-generational riddle that continues to defy a singular, consensus-based explanation, forcing us to constantly reevaluate what we think we know. To truly grasp the mechanical and physical realities of this catastrophe, we must move far beyond the surface-level narrative and attempt to visualize the sheer, unadulterated chaos of that November night through the lens of a forensic reenactment engine. Imagine the Fitzgerald, weighted down by her massive, iron-dense cargo of 26,116 tons of taconite pellets, laboring through a gale that had already stripped away her radar capabilities and left her blind in the darkness. She was a vessel fighting for her very life against the Three Sisters, three sequential, monstrous, steep-faced waves that act as a geometric death trap on the waters of Lake Superior. In a high-fidelity 3D simulation of these physics, the first wave crashes over the bow, burying the forward section in thousands of tons of heavy water. Before the vessel can regain her buoyancy or clear the deluge from her deck, the second and third waves strike in rapid, punishing succession. Because the Fitzgerald was essentially a 729-foot steel beam, if the troughs of these massive, stacking waves left the bow and stern unsupported, while the immense, concentrated weight of the taconite ore remained locked in the center, the ship would have experienced a catastrophic phenomenon known as hogging or sagging. This mechanical stress would have been absolutely lethal, potentially leading to an instantaneous structural failure, snapping the rigid steel hull in two before the crew could even register the fatal nature of the crisis unfolding beneath their feet. This scientific reality leads us into the heart of a bitter, half-century-long intellectual and technical debate, a clash of theories that has pitted marine architects against seasoned, veteran sailors. In this intellectual arena, we see the competing hypotheses battling for dominance in the court of public opinion. The proponents of the cargo hold hatch failure theory argue with clinical precision that the manual clamps were insufficient under the sheer, relentless pressure of the November gale, leading to a breach in the deck that allowed the hold to flood with devastating, unstoppable speed, sinking her like a leaden stone. Opposing them are the structural failure theorists, whose position is bolstered by the grim, undeniable physical reality that the two major sections of the hull now lie 170 feet apart on the lake floor, suggesting a violent, wrenching separation that could only occur if the ship had literally snapped under the extreme stress of the sea. Then there is the shoaling hypothesis, a controversial and compelling theory suggesting that the Fitzgerald, while struggling in the blinding, heavy seas, may have unknowingly struck the shallow, jagged shoals of Caribou Island. This impact would have fatally compromised her hull integrity, initiating a slow, invisible death spiral long before she reached her final, deeper resting place. Each of these theories creates a violent internal conflict in our narrative. Was it human oversight in maintenance, a fundamental design flaw, or a simple, tragic navigational error? The lack of a definitive smoking gun has left a vacuum of certainty, allowing these competing ideas to churn and collide, much like the storm that birthed them, leaving historians to grapple with the possibility that the truth might be a combination of all three failures. However, the most explosive and psychologically traumatic turning point in this entire saga occurred in 1994, when an expedition led by explorer Fred Shannon captured footage that would ignite a firestorm of global controversy, forever altering how we view the tragedy. As the ROV cameras peered into the twisted, rusted wreckage, they revealed a sight that shattered the official narrative of a quick, unaware death. There, resting near the ruins of the ship, was a human body dressed in a life jacket. For the families of the 29 men, this was not merely a grim, disrespectful discovery. It was a devastating, emotional indictment of the official U.S. Coast Guard and NTSB reports, which had long maintained that the crew died without ever knowing the end was coming. The image of that life jacket suggested that the crew had ample time and the clear, conscious intention to attempt to save themselves, completely dismantling the instantaneous sinking theory. It implied that their final moments were not a sudden, clean disappearance into the abyss, but a period of terrifying, agonizing realization as the ship groaned and surrendered to the lake. This discovery triggered an immense, righteous backlash that fundamentally shifted the tone of the entire investigation. The families, who had lived with the official version of events for nearly 20 years, suddenly found their grief and their quest for final closure hijacked by a gruesome, undeniable reality that contradicted everything they had been told. They began to demand justice, not just in the form of a memorial service, but in the form of an honest, public admission from the authorities regarding the true state of the ship. The 1994 discovery forced the public to reconcile with the cold, hard reality that the Fitzgerald was not just a piece of rusting maritime metal. It was, and remains, a watery tomb for 29 individual, irreplaceable lives. The resulting pressure on the maritime industry and government regulators was unprecedented. It transformed the Edmund Fitzgerald from a nautical mystery to be solved into a searing, unforgettable symbol of neglected duty and bureaucratic obfuscation. As the families pushed for accountability, the core of the debate shifted from what happened to the ship to why are we being told only part of the truth. It was a pivotal, transformative moment that redefined the entire tragedy, proving that the most powerful, persistent force on Lake Superior was not the storm itself, but the enduring, agonizing human need for the truth to finally surface, no matter how cold or difficult that truth might be. The Fitzgerald became the benchmark by which all maritime safety would subsequently be measured, forever linked to the principle that a tragedy of this magnitude is not merely an act of nature, but a failure of the system, a haunting, permanent lesson that we are still trying to fully comprehend, even after 5 decades of silence from the deep. The final chapter of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald saga is not etched in the cold, unyielding steel of her hull or the primal fury of the November gales that claimed her. Rather, it is inscribed within the labyrinthine, often opaque halls of bureaucracy and the enduring, melodic resonance of North American culture. Today, the wreck rests in the frigid, still waters of Ontario, protected under the strict, controversial provisions of the Ontario Heritage Act of 2006. This legislation established a 500-meter protected zone around the site, effectively criminalizing unauthorized dives and prohibiting even the use of sophisticated sonar equipment to survey the remains. To the provincial and federal governments, this remains a sacred act of cultural preservation, a deliberate, moral effort to ensure that the final resting place of 29 men is treated with the solemn, untouchable reverence accorded to a cemetery. Yet, to history seekers, independent researchers, and the families who remain haunted by the enduring, unanswered what-ifs, this protection zone feels suspiciously like a shroud cast over the past. One must confront the uncomfortable question: is this policy truly about preserving heritage? Or is it a convenient, state-sanctioned mechanism to prevent independent investigators from uncovering systemic truths about the maritime safety protocols of the 1970s that might prove embarrassing to authorities? There was a glaring institutional contradiction between the official reports produced by the U.S. Coast Guard and the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB. The Coast Guard, in its final assessment, concluded that the sinking was the result of sudden, massive flooding caused by inadequate hatch, covers a theory that effectively shifted the burden of failure onto the uncontrollable force of nature and the perceived negligence of the crew in securing the hatches before the storm peaked. The NTSB, however, reached a significantly different, more complex conclusion, leaning heavily towards structural failure and suggesting that the ship had physically broken apart on the surface before ever reaching the bottom. These conflicting reports left the public, and more importantly, the grieving families, with two distinct and competing truths, neither of which felt complete or entirely honest. This discord fueled a lingering, deep-seated distrust in official narratives that persist to this day, leaving a void where clear answers should reside. Yet, despite this ongoing administrative shadow, the tragedy succeeded in forcing a radical, long-overdue shift in maritime regulation that saved countless lives thereafter. In the wake of the 1975 disaster, the loss of the Queen of the Lakes served as the primary, unavoidable catalyst for the mandatory implementation of modern survival suits, the complete redesign of hatch covers to ensure they were truly weathertight, and a total, rigorous overhaul of load line requirements. We essentially learned to build safer, more resilient ships by studying the catastrophic failure of the one vessel we had deemed invincible. Despite these hard-won technological improvements, the Fitzgerald remains a lightning rod for debate, a symbol of the tension between industrial progress and the absolute limits of human control. This persistent, vibrant narrative is kept alive not just by professional historians, but by the cultural hymn of the Great Lakes, Gordon Lightfoot's 1976 ballad, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Lightfoot's song became far more than a hit record. It transformed into the collective, rhythmic memory of the entire region. It humanized the cold steel plates and the heavy taconite cargo, turning a dry, clinical accident report into a visceral, haunting story of the gales of November and the men who faced them with quiet courage. It ensured that the Fitzgerald would never be forgotten, even as authorities attempted to seal the site from further investigation and public scrutiny. The song gave voice to the silence, ensuring the 29 men were not merely statistics lost to an insurance claim, but icons of the Great Lakes' brutal beauty. As we bring this deep investigation to a close, we are left with one final lingering question. So, what now? We continue to treat the Fitzgerald as a protected grave, a no-go zone for the curious and the scientific. Yet, we must reconcile this with a difficult, gnawing irony. If every shipwreck in the Great Lakes is a grave, why is the Edmund Fitzgerald the only destination treated as a state-sanctioned forbidden zone? By aggressively fencing off the wreck, are we truly protecting the dignity of the 29 men who lost their lives? Or are we inadvertently burying a historical lesson that we have yet to fully master? Perhaps the greatest disservice we can commit against those 29 men is not the intrusion of researchers, but the hollow comfort of an incomplete story. When we sanitize history to avoid institutional embarrassment or to maintain a veneer of bureaucratic order, we lose the very lessons that could save the lives of mariners yet to come. The Fitzgerald remains an open book in the dark, calling out to us from 530 feet below the surface. She serves as a haunting reminder that in the eyes of Lake Superior, no amount of steel, no amount of tonnage, and no amount of institutional hubris can outweigh the elemental truth of the water. We are left with a final choice. Will we continue to hide the truth behind a thick curtain of red tape? Or will we eventually find the courage to face what lies in the silence of the deep? The Fitzgerald deserves more than a protected zone. She deserves the truth. Whether we are ready to accept it remains the final unanswered mystery of the Great Lakes. Before we conclude today's journey, I want to thank you for bearing witness to this haunting history with us. If this deep dive resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe to stay updated on our upcoming investigations into the mysteries of the deep. Do you have any thoughts on the final mystery of the Fitzgerald? Perhaps you have your own theory or a personal connection to this story. Please share your reflections in the comments. We truly want to hear your voice, as your perspective is part of the ongoing conversation. We remember the 29 men who vanished on the 10th of November 1975, leaving behind families forever changed by the gales of Lake Superior. Their legacy endures in every lesson learned since and in every story shared. Thank you for walking this path with us. We look forward to seeing you in the next installment.